In this portion, I am going to be talking about the idea of exposition being necessary because audiences ultimately need the exposition, the backstory, and these are very big challenges for any author to go through. So we call the megaphone effect a pitfall, but in a way it is something to work around as opposed to something to avoid, because exposition is necessary. So how do you get rid of this overexposure to telling the backstory and making your piece unnatural? Well, this is the craziest of ideas. My first point is don't tell the backstory. Just don't. Just simply let the audience live in this kind of fogginess of not knowing everything. And this is actually a level of trust to your audience or your reader. Now, by not telling the backstory through exposition, that doesn't mean you're not giving them some sort of indications of where this is taking place, what sort of background your characters might have had. Indication and exposition are not the same thing. So, if you trust your audience, you're still going to do them the service of providing enough clues so that the audience can figure it out. So, if, number one, you're focused on the relationship between characters, their reaction to the environment around them, as well as the things that are happening to them, then the theme and the style, meaning the thing you ultimately want to say, that's going to come out through your writing. Remember before I said that plot is overrated? We're not throwing plot out, but we are saying that plot is not the highest of high. It's just what happened. So this is getting a little bit deeper about how the plot, the setting, all that business, how that affects the characters. So if you can actually trust your audience and not tell the backstory through exposition, basically what you're doing is you are saying that we want you, audience, to be invested. We want you to possibly even go home and go, what was that about? Do a little research on their own after leaving. And I think that is the biggest win that you can get as a playwright. So I'm actually going to go away from the script for a second and say one of my favorite moments talking with a playwright friend of mine was when we were talking after a play, and she goes, the greatest pleasure that she can get is hearing what the conversation was between the people driving home after the play was. That means they're still talking about it. That means that it affected them in some way. And that ultimately is not done through just summarizing plots, but through theme and style. So another way around this idea of not telling the exposition outright is to create moments of conflict. Now, I'm sure this never happened to you, but in my experience, in relationships, let's just pretend you're a playwright who happens to be married and living in Virginia and made a mistake or two in relationships. Now, that's completely fictional. Not this guy. Completely fictional. Sometimes somebody who's going to have an argument will bring up past events. And if they bring up past events, what I definitely should not do as a husband, or whatever the relationship is, I definitely should not say, stop, I've heard that one before. So by bringing up conflicts and following this concept that conflict allows characters to talk about past events, even though the characters both know what happened, even though they might have different views on it, it lets the audience in on the backstory, but it does a whole bunch of other things as well. It brings up the perspective of the characters, so it's building the character up through telling the backstory, as opposed to the other way of just info dumping. It might also, if you're lucky, give a chance for the second character to retell the story in their own version, which then will really get into point of view and perspective. So here's another thing that maybe you've experienced, maybe you haven't, is if you've ever told or heard a story told from one person's point of view, and then you're at dinner or something, and the other person goes, no, let me tell it. And then they go on and they give a different version, slightly different perhaps, but different. And then the first person jumps back in and continues the story in that other version. You get this sort of battle of perspective. And that's a much more interesting dynamic than just plain old info dumping. So what conflict does is it shows attitude of characters, it shows trigger points, sometimes shows allegiances, sometimes shows the opposite of allegiances, what enemies they might have, and ultimately it does the job of telling the story, which is what you ultimately want to do, but in a sneaky kind of way. The third item, I think, is rather interesting. And this was actually something that was brought up by your teacher. And that is the idea that people do not transparently tell all the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So often, goals and motivations are secret within the mind of the character for as long as possible, because people don't naturally just spill their secrets. And unfortunately, what happens is those secrets are the interesting part of the story. So you got to kind of tease it out of your characters. Now, you can do this in a number of ways. One way is you can just not tell the secret to the very end, to what we can know as a big reveal moment. And if that big reveal moment happens, it definitely should not happen too fast. Otherwise, you're going to lose your audience midway through the play. The big reveal happens towards the end. Secondly, you should note that boring, mundane, ordinary things are not secretified. I don't actually know if that's a word. If it is, that's great. If it's not, I claim rights to it. Ordinary things are not secretified. So keeping the audience out of the know for a short time gives them the sense of being finished, and they're going to get it way before the play is finished. So you don't want to do it too soon. Keeping the audience out of the know for a good balance of time keeps them curious, keeps them satisfied, keeps them guessing, maybe even down the wrong path, and then you make it to the end. Keeping the audience out of the know for too long of a time could lead to frustration, could lead them to shut down, could lead them to say, this isn't worth my time. I spent all this time watching this and I still don't know a thing. So you want that middle one. You want the audience to not know everything for a balance of keeping them curious and keeping them guessing. And then finally, again, to reiterate the thoughts of your teacher, some may say that people lie, but you can look at it in a different way. And it's gonna sound like I'm saying the same thing, but instead of thinking that people lie, how about this? People don't tell the truth. And what that suggests is this idea that they're not lying, they're just not revealing. So straight out lying is a way of not telling the truth, but also not telling the truth is also hiding things or not talking or doing things of this nature. So people are not so willing to share with everyone. If you also think this idea that people mislead others, and lying is a form of misleading, right? People mislead others through a sense of protection. So maybe they're protecting someone else. Maybe they're protecting their own self-identity. So it could be external or internal. But ultimately, what that means is liars don't view what they're doing as bad. They view it as something that is noble almost. Protection of others, or your self-identity perhaps, that's kind of a noble deed. So they start justifying this idea of lying. Now, they might have enough idea in their head to say, you know what, I probably shouldn't be doing this. But ultimately, when push comes to shove, something in their brain says it's more important to protect than to reveal. And that, indeed, is a noble thing. If every character believes this, that means you're not going to get this false sense of people just blurting things out. Rather, everyone's going to try to have self-preservation.